Here today, Melissa Francis, host of Kennedy on the Fox Business Network, Kennedy herself. Fox News contributor Jessica Tarlov, and joining us on the center seat, Chris Wilson is here, Republican strategist and former pollster for the Ted Cruz campaign. Now, when I got all enthusiastic just then, you looked like I hadn't pronounced your name right.
It's Wilson.
Yeah. Oh, it's Wilson. Oh,
traditional pronunciation.
It's great to see you.
Good to see you, too.
You ready to jump in?
Absolutely.
All right, let's do it. Well, this morning, during a gathering of the nation's governors at the White House, the president sounded optimistic that the North Korean regime is willing to give up its nuclear weapons. Watch.
We talk about something that, frankly, he never spoke to anybody about, but we're speaking aloud, and I think we can have a very good summit. I think we'll have a very tremendous summit. We want denuclearization, and I think he'll have a country that will set a lot of records for speed in terms of an economy.
Yesterday, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo insisted President Trump will not repeat mistakes of the past, and drawing a sharp contrast with the policy of the Obama administration.
Test, pray, and cower has been upended by President Trump. We've put real economic pressure on the North Koreans. We've built out a global coalition. One of the critiques is that we go it alone. We've built out the world's coalition to communicate to Chairman Kim that now is the time, now is the moment, and I hope we'll make real progress on that this week.
But Democratic Senator Ed Markey says there is a risk Kim Jong-un will seek to extract concessions from the president without giving anything up himself. Watch it.
Kim wants to have a personal meeting with Trump with hopes that he can, in fact, elicit concessions from President Trump that otherwise might not be possible if it was just our diplomats talking one-on-one. I think that he has to be very careful going in.
Meanwhile, a former CIA officer involved in high-level diplomacy with North Korea told a group on Friday about an alleged conversation between Secretary Pompeo and Kim Jong-un during Pompeo's visit to North Korea last April. That former CIA officer is claiming Kim Jong-un privately told Pompeo that he did not want his children to live with the burden of nuclear weapons. We bring it out to the couch. Chris, what would the significance of that be in terms of what we're trying to accomplish?
Well, listen to Markley. You know, here in the same generation of failed diplomacy advocates now criticize what the president is doing is a little bit tiresome to hear. I think what Donald Trump has been able to accomplish in a short period of time with sort of his aggressive brand of diplomacy is more than they had in their entire time under President Obama, and really going back almost for the last generation. Now, whether he's able to actually ever achieve anything or complete denuclearization remains to be seen. And frankly, it would be remarkable if he were, because the Kims don't care about anything other than enslaving their people and holding on power. But if they are able to take us a step further toward true denuclearization, and what they've already accomplished, I think, is significant in that category. It is frustrating for me to hear the Ed Markleys of the world continue to lob in criticism bombs whenever we've actually moved further in a short period of time.
So what do you make of the former official from the CIA saying that Pompeo and Kim Jong-un supposedly had this conversation? None of us was in the room, so we can't quantify that. But that leader of North Korea didn't want to see his kids grow up in a world where nukes are.
Well, I would say it's encouraging if you do have North Korean leaders recognizing that that the way in which their country has been developing, the fact that they were continuing to test nuclear weapons, probably doesn't bode well for the future of their children's future and growing up in a world that is nuclear free. That is positive, because it means there is at least the opportunity for us to be successful in achieving a denuclearized Korean peninsula.
So I thought it was interesting that it was put this way: test, pray, and cower was how we've always sort of seen the other side deal with this, Kennedy.
And I think that was a progression throughout various administrations, really starting with Bill Clinton, who set just a horrible tone for our diplomacy with North Korea. President Obama said when he left office that was the gravest threat posed to the United States and to the world, was a nuclearized North Korea. And I think the fact that this administration has taken a completely different tack is better for the United States, and it certainly is better for peace. Now, Kim Jong-un talking about how he doesn't want his kids entrapped further in a world where they're held hostage by the necessity for nuclear weapons. I think the harder task Denuclearization is one thing. Yes, that's difficult. It takes a great deal of diplomacy, and it's very complex. What's harder is freeing those people, perhaps millions of people enslaved in labor camps in North Korea, and really allowing a level of freedom
for him because he's got hardliners within his own country.
And that's really what could cause the country to fall apart and cause a revolution from within if people finally get a taste of freedom. We're not just talking about people who are experiencing economic immobility, but people who are truly being held against their will in some of the most dire circumstances on earth.
Yeah, and when you pick places like Singapore and Hanoi to let some of the leadership taste even for them. I mean, they're coming to it in trains with no windows, so they too don't have any freedom, really, technically, but not like what you're talking about with those people. So the president tweeted this today. So funny to watch people who have failed for years. They got nothing telling me how to negotiate with North Korea, but thanks anyway. A lot of Democrats, Jessica, are critical of where the president is in going forward with this.
And a lot of Republicans are as well. John Bolton is probably the most cautious of anyone, certainly.
Well, cautious and criticism are two different things.
Well, there's been implicit criticism. If you even look at Mike Pompeo also sat down with Jake Tapper over the weekend and got into kind of an embarrassing exchange where he said, we want denuclearization. And Jake Tapper said the president said that they aren't a nuclear threat. He said, no, that's not true. And Jake Tapper said that's a direct quote. We had over the weekend, it came out that the president made comments that he would be satisfied with an end to testing. And this morning on Fox and Friends, Brian Kilmeade was pushing back against that and saying that should not be our goal. Denuclearization is the only appropriate goal for this. So when you listen to Senator Markley and some of the more hawkish members of the Republican Party, I think what they're asking for is consistency on this and to ensure that no matter how these meetings go down, that we know clearly what America is after and what we will settle for, and that the rest of it is unacceptable.
Talk to me about the economics of this, because changing their worldview is kind of what's happening.
So that's interesting because when you look at other regimes and despotic regimes around the world, you can see that they're motivated by one of two things. You either have the ones that are motivated by wanting to hold on to power and have money, and then there are others that, believe they've been destined by God to obliterate everybody else who doesn't agree with them. Obviously, that's a harder group of people to deal with. So when you look at Kim Jong-un or even Putin, these are people where money means something to them and helps them with their ability to hang on to power. So bringing him to Hanoi is very interesting because it's like, here's a government structure that we don't agree with, but we are able to trade with them and they are able to be prosperous. You don't have to be a democracy. And I think Kennedy makes a great point that the real problem is how does he hold on to power and hold on to his grip with his own people and give them a little bit of freedom and give up the nukes. It's going to be very hard, but he has to feel like that's a possibility to start down the road of, number one, not threatening people with nuclear weapons. Then number two, after that, we then turn to the humanitarian situation in his own country. But to everyone who says that we haven't gotten anything so far, Ari Fleischer made a great point earlier today. They have to test those ballistic missiles in order to be able to use them to hit us. Yeah. So selfishly, we were talking about how that missile could hit Hawaii. And now that's not the case because they're not testing those. So I know that's not nice for anyone else who's in the neighborhood, but it's inaccurate to say that nothing's been achieved because Americans are safer. We want that for everyone else, but that's just a point to be made.
No, it's very true. And what you were saying about the humanitarian situation over there, Kennedy, we haven't been able to impact. In fact, we haven't been able to put much pressure on China. But Hanoi, Vietnam, in a place where the Chinese would like to move into those seas as well. I mean, and then you see a deal potentially, not to go down too much on the business network side of this, but it's important because it's all the same story.
And when you look at Vietnam's economy, because it had completely collapsed when they went to an isolated communistic system. And then when they finally opened up their markets and became trading partners with the West and with the United States, you've seen a much healthier economy. And I think it's interesting because Singapore is still very authoritarian, and that's more of a model for Kim Jong-un. But Vietnam shows the fruits of free economy and global trade.
All right, the House expected to vote tomorrow on a resolution that would do away with President Trump's emergency declaration on the border. The measure likely to pass with Democratic support and could also pass the Senate with some GOP support. Missouri's Roy Blunt is one of those who could buck the president. Right now, he hasn't made up his mind.
know yet. I don't like the process. I don't think that the emergency declaration law was written to deal with things that the president asked the Congress to do and then the Congress didn't do. It's never been used that way before. I want to look carefully at the law. I want to hear what the president's lawyers have to say about it.
But even if the measure lands on the president's desk, he has promised a veto, and lawmakers skeptical they would have the votes to override it. House Republican Adam Kinzinger recently got back from the Air National Guard deployment to the border, and he says the president is right about the situation down there. Watch.
I support the emergency declaration because when I went out there, there's a lot of immigration issues. We saw a lot of groups coming across the border illegally, but we saw a lot of drugs. We saw a lot of human trafficking. I've seen it. By the way, I've done 3 prior border deployments, all under President Obama. Okay, so it was never controversial under President Obama. If this was just an immigration issue, I probably would also agree it doesn't rise to the level of an emergency declaration. But this is drugs. This is human trafficking.
Meantime, nearly 24 former congressional Republicans and a bipartisan group of 58 former national security officials have come out against the president's declaration. And Chris, I'll start with you. It's interesting to me when you watch this come to the floor and you watch the vote counting. I haven't heard Nancy Pelosi ask for anything for the Dreamers in a really long time. I haven't heard her advocate on behalf of people. I'm only hearing the Democrats say no to what they won't do and what they're against. It feels like people have gotten forgotten in this, especially the Dreamers.
Well, it is, and this is nothing more than a stunt. And in the grand tradition of legislative stunt votes, it's not going to mean anything at the end of the day because, as you mentioned, even if it goes to the president, which is unlikely, he's going to veto it. But I'll tell you, my concern as someone who works for Republicans is what this does do, and I really wish every one of these Republicans that's going to vote against the president would sit down and listen to what Adam Kinzinger said this morning on Fox, is because it puts a lot of Republicans on the Senate, in which they are defending some blue to purple to blue type areas, on the wrong side of an issue that is not going to go well in their state. And frankly, it's a lot of people on our side, on the Republican side, setting up their colleagues to be in tougher situations to win re-election.
Jessica, I bet you disagree with that.
I don't. Purple states and counties are difficult for both sides here. I mean, the same goes for Democrats that are in more conservative districts who have to talk differently about border security than they do in, New York City. Like Jerry Nadler can say whatever he wants about it up here, but it makes a difference if you're down there. Kristen Sinema is indicative of that. She voted with the president over 50% of the time, actually, when she was in Congress. So it is difficult. But then there are Republicans like Will Hurd, whose constituency has a huge chunk of the border that we're talking about right here. And he says we don't need a wall. The problem has always been that the president made up an emergency when things got really bleak for him. He talked about it consistently through the first 2 years in the campaign, but then he suddenly got to a boiling point and said it's a national emergency, when yes, there are drugs coming, but they're going through points of entry, which means we have people there that are stopping them. The numbers do not bear out his argument that this is an emergency. If you look at Border Patrol statistics, the numbers are going down over the last 2 decades. So when he gets up in the Rose Garden and he says, I didn't need to do this, but people are going to be skeptical and they don't want to set a bad precedent.
Don't we only know that they're going through the ports of entry because they're able to stop them there and we have people
right, but
there,
the
but the ones that are going in everywhere else,
but we don't
have
know
that.
About we don't have, Sarah Sanders with Chris Wallace got schooled on that.
Well,
about
the president today, though, had a different take on that. He was saying that there are areas that are outside.
The president and I always have a different take.
Well, you can have a different take with the president, but we've also seen recently members of Congress down there eyeing it for themselves as well. Kinzinger is the only one that I know of who's deployed recently, but we've had congressional delegates go down there as well. So the point that I would make is it good enough just to protect those areas where we say ports of entry where we can keep up with it?
I think the difference is ports of entry versus national emergency. You can have a conversation about border security, but we're talking about declaring a national emergency, and that is the issue.
But if you listen to what Kinzinger described, what part of that do you not believe is an emergency?
Kennedy,
go ahead, Kennedy.
Yeah, I could do it, but I want to make sure Kennedy gets in.
I don't understand why you've got 2 different groups of people who go to 2 different parts of the border and see 2 completely different things. What I would like to see is both of them swap and see if there's any consistency with their reporting back of what's happening at the border, or if this is just a series of confirmation biases, which in that case, the whole thing is essentially a fraud and we're not getting the truth from anyone. If you want to know why drug cartels send drugs through ports of entry, you have to go back and read some of the testimony from the El Chapo trial, because he was the largest exporter of drugs into our country.
Point.
And they said that they went to these legal ports of entry because they could get a lot more drugs through those points.
In a big vehicle. There you go.
Submarines,
All right.
tankers.
Comedian Bill Maher mocking people in red states as being less educated and earning less money than people in blue states. Whether that kind of elitism bodes badly for Democrats in 2020. Plus, House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff vows to subpoena the Mueller report if the DOJ doesn't make it public. Whether this is all about Russia or if Democrats have a larger agenda, we'll debate.